The unit designation was Subject Delta 7, but the analysts in the Veth Car Intelligence Division had taken to calling him something else. They called him the anomaly. It began the way these things always began. A routine survey, a low-priority file, the kind of dossier that got handed to junior analysts on their first rotation, because nothing in it was supposed to matter. The Veth Core Reclamation Fleet had been cataloging the third planet of this unremarkable yellow star system for 11 cycles. And most of what they'd compiled was exactly what you'd expect. Territorial disputes, chemical dependencies, irrational resource allocation, the usual self-defeating behavioral loops that made the species a low-threat classification. Watch them, log them, do not engage until the extraction window opened. Standard procedure. But then came the Delta files. The analyst who first flagged them was a 7-limbed mid-rank surveyor named Seth 4, and she filed a formal notation in the mission log that read, in rough translation, "I don't know what I'm looking at, and I would prefer if someone more senior reviewed this before I am held responsible for it." Seth 4 was wise. The senior analyst who took over, a Vethkar of considerable standing named Orvale Nis, whose sensory clusters had cataloged 600 species across 4 galactic arms, reviewed the Delta files for 2 full cycles. Then he filed his own notation. "I also don't know what I'm looking at. I am recommending a full interdisciplinary review. This is the record of that review." Subject Delta 7 first appeared in the surveillance grid during a standard sweep of a mid-sized human population cluster in the northern continent. The automated sorting algorithms initially flagged him as a probable leader variant, based on the frequency with which other humans oriented their bodies toward him. This is a reliable behavioral metric. The Vethkar have applied it across hundreds of species. It has a margin of error smaller than 3%. In the case of Delta 7, it produced meaningless results. When the analyst pulled the audio feeds and began cross-referencing the behavioral data, what they found was this. Other humans did not orient toward Delta 7 because he held authority. They oriented toward him because they weren't sure what he was going to do next. "This is a meaningfully different phenomenon. He showed up at my sister's wedding," said one human female in a recording captured during a community gathering the analyst had initially catalogued as a low-stimulation social ritual. She was speaking to another human, a male with calloused hands and the particular stillness of someone accustomed to physical labor. Nobody invited him. He brought a kazoo. The male with the calloused hands did not appear surprised. "Did he play it?" "For 45 minutes. A pause. "Was your sister upset?" The female considered this at length. "No," she said finally. "That's the thing," she cried. She said it was the most beautiful thing anyone had done for her. And I listened to the recording later, and it just sounded like she stopped. Started again. It sounded like a kazoo. The analysts tagged this exchange as behaviorally anomalous and moved on. They had thousands of hours of surveillance footage to sort. At this stage, Delta 7 was still just a data point, a minor irregularity in the grid, the kind of thing that gets a yellow flag and a note saying, "Revisit if pattern persists." The pattern persisted. What the Vethkar understood about humanity at the time the Delta files began was this. The species operated on a predictive framework built around self-interest, social hierarchy, and fear of death. These are the 3 universal load-bearing pillars of sapient behavior. Every species the Vethkar had ever encountered, from the aquatic hive minds of the Pellucid Rift to the gaseous distributed consciousness entities of the Outer Arm, could be modeled reliably using some variant of these 3 pillars. The pillars told you what a species would do when threatened, what it would sacrifice to preserve status, how hard it would resist when something it valued was taken away. The pillars were not perfect, but they were enough. Delta 7 did not appear to have pillars. Or rather, and this was the part that kept Orvale Nis staring at his displays long after his colleagues had rotated out. Delta 7 appeared to have them, but in some inverted form that the standard predictive model couldn't process. He registered fear responses when the model predicted comfort. He registered comfort responses when the model predicted fear. His social behavior read as high status in some metrics and completely invisible in others, often simultaneously. "He gave my grandmother his coat," said a heavy-set human male in another captured recording, this one from a gathering that appeared to involve the consumption of fermented liquid and the collaborative production of noise. In July, it was 90 degrees out. She didn't ask for it. He just walked up, took it off, put it on her shoulders, and then went and stood in the sun for 3 hours like it was fine. The interviewing human, a young female the analysts had catalogued as a frequent Delta 7 proximity contact, leaned forward. Was she cold? That's what I'm saying, I have no idea. She never said she was cold, she had the coat, and she kept it. The man took a long drink from his cup. She wore it to her funeral. A short silence. She wore it to her own funeral. She planned the whole thing herself. Picked the flowers, wrote the program, the whole deal. She specifically said to put the coat on her. He shook his head slowly. The way humans do when a thought is too large for the container they're trying to put it in. I keep thinking about why she did that, what it meant to her, and then I think about why he did it, and I can't get there either. I can't get there. The analyst flagged this exchange in 5 separate categories. By the time the interdisciplinary review was formally convened, the Delta files had grown to encompass over 300 individual contact recordings, 47 behavioral pattern analyses, and a supplementary report from the Xenopsychology division that ran to 60 pages and could be summarized in a single sentence. We do not have a framework for this. Orville Nis presented the findings personally. He had been alive for the equivalent of 200 human years. He had catalogued gas giants and living nebulae, and a species that communicated exclusively through bioluminescent patterns that took 11 years to decode. He was not a being who was easily unsettled. The subject does not appear to be a leader, he began. He does not appear to be a follower. He does not appear to occupy any stable position within human social hierarchies. Individual humans who are in contact with him range from the highest status categories to the lowest, and there is no discernible pattern in how he relates to either group. He paused. He appears to treat them identically. This caused a small stir among the assembled analysts. Identically? Said a junior analyst from the biological assessment team. You mean he cannot distinguish? He distinguishes perfectly, Orville Nis said. The recordings are clear. He is aware of status differentials. He acknowledges context. He simply does not appear to behave differently based on them. Another pause. We find this difficult to model. The understatement hung in the air for a moment. There is also, Orville Nis continued, the question of the instrument, the kazoo. The Veth Corps had initially classified it as a signaling device, which was technically accurate, in the way that calling the sun a source of warmth is technically accurate and also completely insufficient. They had logged its acoustic output and filed it under ritual audio implements, alongside drums, horns, and the clicking stick instruments of the Prelian Federation. Standard procedure. But the more they watched Subject Delta 7, the more the kazoo resisted standard procedure. He played it at weddings. He played it at what appeared to be funerals, though the mourners reported feeling afterward something adjacent to comfort, which the Xenopsychology division found inexplicable. He played it at the edge of a river at dawn, on what appeared to be no significant occasion at all, for an audience of 0, with the same focus and apparent intention as every other performance. He played it in the hospital, said a young human female. In one of the later recordings, her voice pitched low, the cadence of someone choosing words slowly. When my brother was in there, not visiting hours, middle of the night. I don't know how he got in. I went out to get coffee, and when I came back, my brother was awake and he said someone had been playing music. She stopped. My brother hadn't woken up in 11 days. The female interviewer was quiet for a long moment. And then what happened? He died, the young woman said. Her voice was level. Not the flatness of someone suppressing grief, but something more complex than that. 4 days later. But he was awake for those 4 days. He said things he needed to say. My mom got to, she stopped again. Started again differently, we were ready, is what I'm saying. Because of those 4 days, we were ready. And I don't know what that means, whether it matters in the grand scheme, but it meant everything. It still means everything. Orville Nis had reviewed this recording 17 times. He still did not know what category it belonged in. The review board convened for 6 cycles. They brought in specialists from 4 different divisions. They ran Delta 7's behavioral pattern through every predictive model in the fleet's database, including several that were considered experimental, and 2 that were technically classified. None of the models produced coherent results. He is not functioning as a threat vector, said the lead analyst, from tactical assessment, in a tone suggesting this was not the relief it should have been. He is not accumulating resources, not cultivating followers in any exploitable sense, not acquiring status. He is not doing any of the things our models associate with a high-risk individual. And yet, said Orville Niss, and yet, the tactical analyst agreed, because the recordings kept coming, because every human who appeared in them said something that the analysts couldn't categorize, and then went back to their lives. And the lives looked different, afterward, in ways the standard metrics weren't built to measure. A man who'd been recorded describing Delta 7 giving away his coat was later observed, years later, doing the same thing for a stranger, unprompted, in winter rain. Not a coat this time. His umbrella, which he didn't get back, which he did not appear to want back. The models said this was irrational. The models the analysts were beginning to suspect were wrong about something fundamental. There was a woman in the recordings named Kirby Graves. She appeared in more of the Delta files than anyone else. Not as a subject, but as someone perpetually adjacent to the story, always just at the edge of things. Always in the middle of some other task when the cameras caught her. She had scar tissue along her left forearm that the medical analysis division dated to a significant injury in her early youth, and she held herself with the particular careful economy of someone who'd spent a long time learning how much any given situation required of her, and not giving more than that. She did not, in the hours of surveillance footage, once directly discuss Delta 7. This was notable because every other human in the recordings did. Eventually, usually at length, in the final weeks before the review board issued its report, one of the junior analysts pulled an audio clip that had nearly been discarded during initial processing, because the relevant foreground conversations had been flagged as high priority, and the background noise had been logged as ambient, but the analyst, sitting with the clip for other reasons, had heard it, in the background of a community gathering, barely audible under the foreground chatter. Kirby Graves, talking to someone out of frame. Her voice was low and certain, not declaiming, just speaking, the way someone speaks when they are stating a thing they've known for so long it has stopped feeling like a thought and has become something more like weather. She said, "People want to know what he is. Like he's a puzzle you can solve if you look at him long enough. But you're looking at the wrong thing." The person out of frame said something the audio couldn't fully reconstruct. "Because he's not a thing that happened to him," Kirby Graves said. "He's not a story that explains him. He does what he does. He plays his stupid kazoo. He gives people his coat. He shows up." A pause. "That's all there is. There's no secret. There's nothing to find." Another thing, unclear, from the person out of frame. "I know it doesn't help," Kirby Graves said. "That's the point. There's nothing to find. That's the thing you have to get used to." The Veth Corps Reclamation Fleet's Interdisciplinary Review Board issued its report in the 73rd cycle of the survey mission. The report was 412 pages long and contained, in its final section, the following conclusion. Subject Delta 7 does not represent a tactical concern as currently defined by fleet operational parameters. He does not fit standard classification frameworks for threat assessment, resource competition, or social disruption. However, the review board wishes to note, for the record, that this assessment may indicate a deficiency in the frameworks rather than an absence of significance in the subject. The humans in the Delta recordings exhibit behavioral changes following contact with subject Delta 7 that are not predicted by our models. The changes are not dramatic. They are not militarily relevant. They are, by any standard metric we possess, trivially small, and yet, a woman kept a coat at her own funeral. A man woke up with 4 days he hadn't been expected to have, a child learned, from a distant adult who owed her nothing, that an act of attention, a 45-minute kazoo performance at a stranger's wedding, could mean more than any practical gift. We do not know how to model these outcomes. We do not know how to predict what this subject, or subjects like him, will produce over the course of a human lifetime, or how those outcomes propagate through the population, or what a civilization looks like, long-term, when it contains individuals like this. We do not frankly know what we are looking at. We are recommending extended observation. We are recommending that the extraction timeline be revisited. We are recommending that the working assumption that this species can be understood through self-interest, social hierarchy, and fear of death be subjected to formal review. It is possible that we have been wrong about the pillars. Orville Miss submitted one final note to the mission log after the report was filed. It was not standard procedure. It was not asked for. His colleagues, when they read it later, were not certain what to do with it. It said, "I have spent 200 years cataloging the things that make species dangerous. I have been, I think, looking for the wrong things. There is a recording in the Delta files of Subject Delta 7 standing at a riverbank at dawn, playing a small humming instrument into empty air, with no audience and no apparent reason. I have watched it 31 times. I do not know what it means. I suspect that if I watched it 300 times I would still not know. I am leaving it in the files without a category. I think it is important that it remains uncategorized." Kirby Graves was sitting on a wooden step, outside a hardware store eating a sandwich, when the surveillance drone caught its last clip of her, several weeks after the review board had filed its report. She didn't know the drone was there. She didn't know about any of it, the files, the review, the 412 pages. The analysts who had spent weeks trying to find the structure in something that had no structure. She was just eating her sandwich. A dog wandered over from somewhere. She looked at it for a moment. Then she tore off a piece of the sandwich and held it out, and the dog ate it from her hand. She watched it go. Then she went back to eating her lunch. The drone's recording algorithm had been set to flag unusual activity. It logged this clip as ambient, no action required, and it would have been discarded automatically at the end of the cycle. But Seth Vuor, the junior analyst who had first kicked the Delta files up the chain, who had since been promoted twice, largely on the basis of her instincts, saw it in the discard queue and pulled it. She watched it once. She tagged it, retain, reason. Unknown, she filed it without explanation. She thought for a long time after about the sandwich, about the ease of it, about how the hand opened, without calculation, without hesitation, without anything that looked like a decision being made at all. She thought about what it meant to do a thing simply because the moment asked for it. She thought about it for a long time. She thought they all needed to think about it.